Our next speaker is going to be Michael Baum, who was a co-litigator in the first successful lawsuits against glyphosate. And so he will tell you about that, and then he will tell you about the lawsuits that are coming up now. He is a partner at Wisner Baum, used to be called Baum Hedlund. He is a friend. He is an excellent attorney. After his talk and before Don Huber's talk, we will take a 5-minute break. So if you can hang on that long, we will start with Michael Baum.
Hi, everyone. I'm Michael Baum. I have been one of the attorneys that worked on the Monsanto Roundup trials that ended up with a series of the bigger verdicts. That was a big win for people who are interested in having organic food, healthy food, and detoxifying their environment. But it's not the end, because despite all those wins, getting all these documents out, we are still facing this corporations and bears having taken over them, their attempt to have freedom to operate. A lot of what happened in this case and this litigation started with IARC, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, publishing an analysis that found that Roundup was a Class 2A probable human carcinogen. And this happened in March of 2015. Shortly after that, some friends of mine and I started finding out about cases like this. And actually, one of the relatives of one of our staff had actually died from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, or was at that time ill from non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and then died that Christmas following use of Roundup in his orchard. This classification caused seismic events inside Monsanto, and they engaged in a large-scale counterattack against IARC and any of the scientists that would come up and say anything critical of Monsanto. And they had implemented a battle plan to undermine, invalidate, and make go away any of the negative science. This particular finding by IARC created the basis in California for products containing glyphosate, like Roundup, to carry a warning label regarding the carcinogenic risks of glyphosate. And the state of California brought this action, and Monsanto resisted it, and it ended up being a really serious legal and legislative battle that we helped join and tried to help provide documents to the state as a result of the lawsuits that we filed. There was, in fact, substantial scientific evidence showing that Roundup was a substantial factor in causing cancers. Starting in '85, the EPA themselves had come to the conclusion that there was sufficient animal trial evidence to show that Roundup, or glyphosate in particular, ought to have been classified as a Class C carcinogen. So because it was causing tumors in animals and it was genotoxic, and there was epidemiological evidence showing that there was elevated rates of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma type cancers occurring around areas where people were getting exposed to Roundup. Amongst the evidence that we got, and this is one of the advantages of doing litigation, is you get documents that are internal documents and you get them under seal, and then as the litigation goes forward, you're able to declassify some of the documents, which is what we did. This one showed that early on, back in April of '85, there was an internal analysis by the EPA that they were planning to classify glyphosate as a Class C carcinogen, but they were going to hire Dr. Marvin Kushner, and this is what was amusing or ironic, I guess, is he will review the kidney sections and present his evaluation of them to EPA in an effort to persuade the agency that the observed tumors are not related to glyphosate. He hadn't seen the slides yet, hadn't seen anything yet, but he had already arrived at what his conclusion was going to be. There were some studies that I mentioned that came out. They were concerned about that internally, and so they decided to hire a genotoxicologist, one of the leading guys in the world, James Perry, to analyze the present state of studies. He did that, and then he wrote a report back to them and concluded that the 4 articles on glyphosate showed that it was genotoxic and that it could cause DNA lesions in vivo, and that was probably due to oxidative damage. So instead of publishing that report, they suppressed it, hired some other scientists to issue a different report, which they ghost wrote, and that became the public science at that point on refuting that there was a genotoxic problem with Roundup. But as a result of litigation, we were able to find what they actually had internally and show how they suppressed it. If they had freedom to operate, this type of information would never have become public. From between around the end of 2015 and up through like 2019, we litigated and tried cases in California regarding Roundup. One was Lee Johnson, who was the first one that was up in San Francisco, worker for the school system, and he basically had his pack of Roundup break loose, and he got inundated a couple of times with Roundup, and he had lesions all over his body as a result of that. The one in the upper right, the Cambria widow, was the first client we had, and he had a nice orchard that he ran, and that he and his dog would go around spraying the trees in the orchard with Roundup. And both Mr. McCall and his dog got lymphomas and died. We were able to, in the first trial, get a $289 million verdict for Lee Johnson. In the second trial, in the federal court, got an $80 million verdict for Mr. Hardiman. And then we went back to the drawing board between those two trials, did some more depositions, got some documents lined up better, and were able to get a $2 billion verdict in the Billiards case. All during which we were able to get hundreds of documents showing Monsanto's efforts to suppress the data, ghostwrite science, interfere with scientists, actually get scientists' studies retracted, manipulate scientific journals and leverage them to retract studies. All of that information we were able to get out to the public as a result of doing the litigation and get these substantial verdicts for our clients. And so these were landmark verdicts. They were among the first positive verdicts against Monsanto for Roundup inducing cancer. And they had a major impact around the world. We ended up giving lectures to legislators in Canada and in Europe. They created a pesticide committee of parliamentarians to investigate the misuse of Roundup in food production and to seek ways to actually get pesticides better regulated. One of the most important issues that came up as a result of our trial was finding out that pesticide formulations are not actually tested. They test all the parts separately, and the synergistic effect of all the chemicals together are what cause the major harm. And they're able to convey the idea that The parts are not a problem because the parts themselves separately are not as carcinogenic or is not as toxic as the parts together, the components together. So among the things that happened in Europe was they were going to require having the formulations measured and tested. And so that was a fight we tried to have here in the US with the EPA, and Monsanto sought to fight that. And it was another part of their effort to have freedom to operate. And in the absence of lawsuits like this, they would do another thing that they did, by the way, is they tried to defund IARC. So they actually brought actions in Congress to prevent the U.S. from contributing to independent science being done by IARC. And because we had all these documents, we were able to go arm the legislators that were opposed to that and give them a reason to fend that off. But in the absence of the litigation to get those documents and stop this effort to have IARC and independent scientists suppressed, they would have just rolled over and bulldozed them over. In these trials, it was determined that Roundup was a substantial factor in causing our plaintiffs, our clients, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. This set of trial victories motivated the judge that had all the consolidated actions in the federal court system up in San Francisco to direct Monsanto and Bayer to engage in settlement negotiations, because it was, from his perspective, clear that the handwriting was on the wall and that it was time to settle. And so that led to this $10.9 billion initial settlement for about 100,000 people. We represented around 3,300 of those. Now, one of the things that our litigation showed was that from the very beginning, there was fraud in the animal trials conducted by this IBT company, and that there was a relationship between Monsanto and IBT faking the results and interfering with the results at the very beginning of Roundup's history and glyphosate's history. That never got properly fixed. The magic tumor that Dr. Kushner found to get rid of the Class C finding at the beginning back in 1985, they never actually did the proper animal trials they were supposed to do to replace what was done with IBT and to address what Kushner allegedly found, a tumor that wasn't actually there in the non-exposed group. They fabricated science by one, suppressing the results of James Perry, and then having a group of scientists who basically accepted ghost-written papers to refute, assert a different conclusion than when Mr. Perry did, or Dr. Perry did. They engaged in measuring the components separately without measuring the formulations. They refused to warn, and they still refuse to warn. And throughout, on the and the emails that we saw internally, they insisted that they wanted to have freedom to operate. How do we keep from being regulated? How do we keep from having trials and lawsuits brought against us? How do we keep regulators out of our hair? They internally would say things like, well, we can't actually say that Roundup is not carcinogenic because we never tested Roundup. We've only tested the components. As a result of these lawsuits, that type of information came out, and it actually led to some changes throughout the world. And still more needs to be done because they will not give up. They are like, they keep coming at it, still refuse to warn that there's a Roundup causes non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, and they still insist on having a freedom to operate, which is part of what this new legislation is about. a company like this should not have freedom to operate. They should not have immunity from liability. The only way that this type of information comes out is as a result of litigation where we can conduct discovery. They have the ability to win some of these trials. It isn't as if that they need a blanket immunity in order to prevent runaway verdicts. Another one just came out. They just won another one today out in Missouri. But you can see, several of these. There's a hung jury. Some got dismissed. Some the jury ruled against the plaintiff in California. There were like 5 or 6 in a row in Missouri that all lost. One in Oregon. But you can see that there were also some that won. There was another $2 billion verdict in Pennsylvania, in the Mekavison case. There's some more multi-million-dollar ones. There's one for $330 million for the Dennis case, and another for $175 million for the Crunchy case. So it isn't as if they don't have the ability to defend themselves. There are some cases that have, they didn't have really good exposure to Roundup. Sometimes the cancers they have are not the ones that show statistically significant association with Roundup. And there's a lot of things that go into a positive case. And good use of the documents and things of that sort is important as well. But throughout the documents we saw, they always wanted to get immunity from liability. They tried to say that preemption, which is a principle of saying that because if the EPA says it's safe, therefore it's safe, therefore you can't file a lawsuit. They tried that out in almost every lawsuit, and we won it and beat it every time. And they took it all the way up to the Supreme Court, and they lost. And they're still trying that. And now, having lost that, they're seeking this new path, which is to get legislative immunity and prevent anybody from filing lawsuits at all against Monsanto. And this is, part of their planning, and they are very strategic planners on how to prevent themselves from having exposure and having their freedom to operate limited. Their latest push is this congressional immunity in the Farm Bill. In this, they're seeking to prohibit the right to sue for failure to warn and if people are harmed by pesticides. If that were to happen, none of this information that we've been able to get out in the form of the Monsanto papers would ever get out. They would be able to bulldoze over the IARC and independent scientists that we protected with these documents, and it would be a substantial loss to our health and the rights and safety of people in general if this were to pass. It also would interfere with local agencies and local governments restricting pesticides that in order to protect places where there's excess use and excess exposure of pesticides that are causing harms. To me, I would say that it's literally letting the companies like this, the pesticide manufacturers, Bayer and Monsanto, get away with murder. People die as a result of getting exposed to these cancer-causing ingredients. So the people would be underwarned about them, the attention that comes to them as a result of all the documents and trials, none of that notoriety would be there. It would all just get swept over, and the pervasive toxic environment that we already have would become even worse if they have their freedom to operate through this act. And again, you can see through these pictures how much there's already there, and imagine that it would just be worse. This would be a terrible thing for them to have unregulated freedom to operate, to poison all of our lands without any sort of repercussions, without any sort of hindrances. Their ability to lie, cheat, and steal, basically, murder, would be unreined. the limitations that there are when there's not enough would even be less. Our civil justice system, the ability to file lawsuits, is what is between us and companies like Bayer, like Monsanto, having freedom to operate, which means freedom to poison the environment without anybody holding them accountable. All of our documents that we obtained in litigation, all the depositions, all the expert reports, all the internal documents we got declassified, all the trial exhibits, they're on our website at Wisner Baum. And just do a search for Monsanto papers, you can get them. They're searchable and easy to use. They're useful for activists to make a stack of them and take them to their legislators, say, you cannot let this happen. And that's the type of thing that we've done in the context of Roundup. We also have done it in the context of vaccine mandates on Gardasil. You email the people that are involved and you show up on their doorsteps with documents and tell them this is a bad idea. And I strongly recommend, I'm preaching to the choir here. I know you all will do that. Thank you.
You heard from Michael Baum, and the emphasis I want to make on what he said is that Monsanto and Bayer have crafted a bill that will prohibit any lawyers from suing them for failure to warn about any pesticides or herbicides. And what that means is that the pesticide, if that bill passes, if they spend enough money and can lobby enough to get that bill passed, much more toxic pesticides and herbicides could be in the offing. Um, this same problem is what we're facing with vaccines, because you cannot sue a vaccine manufacturer for a vaccine that's on the childhood schedule or the pregnancy schedule. Um, Basically, the quality of those vaccines can diminish over time. The quality control can get worse because the company knows it can't be sued. And what its primary responsibility is profitability for its shareholders. So if they can make the product more cheaply, they're going to do so. And when you remove the brakes of the regulators from these industries, we know what happens. It's happened over and over again. So we don't want to have that happen. And this is a bill stuck into the Farm Bill that might even go forward this year or next session. So we will give you more information about fighting that tomorrow.